Rain drummed on the roof of the Lakeland police station, creating a monotonous background noise for the start of the workday. Detective Yasmin Prentice grimaced as she looked out her office window at the gray sky and streams of water running down the glass. She loved her job, but she hated rainy days. They always brought an extra dose of crime, as if the darkness of human vice descended on the city along with the raindrops. Yasmin was 42 years old and had impressive experience working for the Lakeland Police Department. A slender black woman with short dreadlocks and piercing dark brown eyes, she had earned a reputation as a detective who never backed down. Her colleagues respected her for her professionalism and tenacity, and criminals feared her intuition, which rarely failed her. A knock on the office door brought Yasmin out of her reverie. Captain Johnson's head appeared in the doorway. "Prentice, you have a new case," he said, handing her a folder. "A woman is missing, Zoe Hayward, 30 years old. Her husband reported her missing last night. It's an unusual case. I think you should take it." "What's unusual about it?" Yasmin took the folder, flipping through the first few pages with a photo of a smiling, dark-skinned woman with high cheekbones and long hair pulled back into a neat hairstyle. "She's transgender," the captain replied. "She transitioned 2 years ago. Her husband says she didn't come home from work the day before yesterday. No trace of her. Grab Peterson and get to work." Yasmin nodded. Transgender people in their city were often victims of hate crimes, but these were usually assaults, not disappearances. This was indeed an unusual case. An hour later, she was sitting in the living room of a small house in the southern part of Lakeland, watching Percy Cutler, the missing woman's husband. Percy was a tall man of 37, with short hair and a scruffy beard. He sat on a worn sofa, nervously rubbing his large mechanic's hands, which were stained with machine grease. "Mr. Cutler, tell me again when you last saw your wife," Yasmin asked, watching his reaction closely. "I already told you," he sighed irritably. "The day before yesterday morning when she left for work. Zoe works at the Bliss Beauty Salon on Main Street. She was supposed to be back by 6, but she didn't show up. I called her, but her phone was off." "And you waited all day before calling the police?" Yasmin asked. "I thought she might be late with her friends," Percy shrugged, "or go somewhere after work." "Zoe loves her freedom." Something in his tone alarmed the detective. Percy seemed more annoyed than concerned about his wife's disappearance. His gaze wandered around the room, avoiding direct eye contact with Yasmin. "Have you had any conflicts recently?" she asked. "No," Percy replied too quickly. "We were fine." "Fine?" Yasmin raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "Well, you know," he shrugged. "A normal family. We argued sometimes, but nothing serious." "What did you argue about?" Percy hesitated. "The usual things. Money, work. Zoe spent a lot on her appearance. Cosmetics, clothes, all those women's things." Yasmin noticed him wince slightly as he said the last words. "Did you support your wife's decision to transition?" she asked bluntly. "I love Zoe," Percy replied, not looking at her. "When she was Zachary and now, it was her decision and I accepted it." Detective Prentice made a note in her notebook. Something about his words sounded false, like a rehearsed phrase he repeated to convince others, and perhaps himself. "Can I look around your house?" she asked. "There might be some clues." "Of course," Percy stood up. "But there's nothing there. I've already checked everything." Yasmin slowly walked around the small house. In the bedroom, she paused at the dressing table, which was covered with cosmetics and skincare products. A framed photograph caught her attention. It showed Zoe and Percy smiling and hugging each other. But something about their posture suggested tension. In the bathroom, Yasmin found several bottles of hormone medication. She photographed the names for further investigation. "Mr. Cutler," she asked when she returned to the living room. Who else might have known Zoe's daily routine? Who did she talk to? "She had a friend, Uriah Kingsley," Percy replied with a hint of irritation in his voice. "They were friends before she changed. He was very supportive during her transition. He runs the Blue Jazz Bar on Pine Street." Could anyone have wanted to harm her? Maybe she had conflicts at work or somewhere else. "I don't know," Percy said, lowering his eyes. "People react differently to people like her. Some neighbors stopped saying hello when they found out, But there were no direct threats. At least she never mentioned any to me. As she left the Cutler home, Yasmin couldn't shake the feeling that Percy wasn't telling her everything. He seemed too calm for someone whose wife had gone missing. It was as if he knew more than he was letting on. The next stop was the beauty salon Bless, where Zoe worked. The owner of the salon, a full-figured woman with bright pink hair, introduced herself as Rochelle. "Zoe is one of our best stylists," she said, leading Yasmin into the back room so as not to disturb the customers. "The customers adore her. She's always friendly and attentive." "Was she at work on the day she disappeared?" asked the detective. "Yes, until 5 o'clock, as usual," nodded Rochelle. "Nothing unusual. She said goodbye and left. She said she was going home." "How has she been acting lately? Have you noticed anything strange?" Rochelle thought for a moment. "Well, she seemed a little tense the last couple of weeks. I asked her if everything was okay, but she said she was just tired." The woman lowered her voice. "You know, she's been going through a lot. Transition is difficult. And then there's her husband." "What about her husband?" Yasmin asked. "I don't want to gossip." Rochelle looked around, even though they were alone. "But Zoe sometimes came home with bruises. She said she'd bumped herself, but we all knew. Percy didn't always handle the situation well. He tried, but sometimes his patience snapped." This information made Yasmin even more wary. Domestic violence often preceded more serious crimes. "Do you have any surveillance cameras?" she asked. "Only inside the salon," Rochelle replied, "but you can check the camera at the store across the street. It faces our parking lot." After obtaining the camera footage, Yasmin saw Zoe leaving the salon at 5:10 p.m., getting into her car and driving away. This confirmed that she had indeed left work. But where did she go after that? The Blue Jazz Bar didn't open until evening, so Yasmin decided to visit Uriah Kingsley at home. She found his address in the police database, and half an hour later was standing at the door of a modest apartment in the eastern part of the city. Uriah was a thin man with shoulder-length dreadlocks and attentive eyes. When he heard about Zoe's disappearance, he turned pale. "I told her to be careful," he muttered, letting the detective into the minimalist apartment. "This city isn't the safest place for someone like her." "When was the last time you saw Zoe?" Yasmin asked, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. 3 days ago," Uriah replied. "She stopped by the bar after work. We talked for a while." "About what?" Uriah hesitated. "About this and that. Work, plans for the future." "Mr. Kingsley," Yasmin leaned forward, "if you know anything that could help find Zoe, you have to tell us." Uriah sighed and ran his hand over his face. "She was afraid of Percy," he finally said. "She didn't say so directly, but I could see it. He controlled her every move, every penny she spent. When she decided to leave, he seemed to support her, but then he started drinking and taking it out on her. Zoe put up with it, saying he'd get used to it, that he needed time." "Did she mention any specific threats?" "No, but the last time we saw her, she said something strange. She said, 'If anything happens to me, don't believe it was an accident.' I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head and changed the subject." Those words made Yasmin tense. It seemed that Zoe had sensed danger. "Could she have left voluntarily?" asked the detective. "Maybe she was planning to escape from her husband?" Uriah thought for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe. She often talked about wanting to start over somewhere in a big city where no one knew her past. But she would have told me if she had decided to do something like that." Leaving Uriah's apartment, Yasmin felt that the case was becoming increasingly complicated. If Zoe was afraid of her husband, why didn't she go to the police? And if she ran away, why didn't she contact her best friend? Back at the station, Yasmin immersed herself in researching Zoe and Percy's past. She learned that they had married 5 years ago, when Zoe was still Zachary. 2 years ago, Zachary began transitioning, changed his name to Zoe, and legally changed his gender. Percy Cutler had several run-ins with the police for bar fights, but no serious charges were ever filed. He had been working as a mechanic at Jimmy's Auto Repair for 8 years. Yasmin decided to visit the repair shop. The owner, an elderly man with a gray mustache, shook his head when he heard about Zoe's disappearance. "I feel sorry for the girl," he said. "Percy didn't come to work today. He said he was busy looking for his wife. He's a good mechanic, but he has a temper, especially lately. What do you mean? Yasmin asked. He's become nervous and irritable. He's snapped at customers a couple of times. I thought I'd put it down to problems at home, but... The man lowered his voice. I heard him on the phone last week. He was shouting that he'd pay back the debt and asking for a little more time. I don't know who he was talking to, but it sounded serious. This was a new lead. Debts could explain Percy's tense behavior and might have something to do with Zoe's disappearance. That evening, Yasmin received a call from an officer who had been interviewing the Cutlers' neighbors. Detective Prentice, he said. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Patterson, saw Zoe getting into an unfamiliar car on the day she disappeared, around 6 in the evening. Are you sure it was Zoe? Yasmin asked. Absolutely. She said she recognized her by her bright red coat. The car was black, possibly a Chevrolet, but she didn't get the license plate number. There was a man driving, but she didn't get a good look at him. This information changed the picture. Zoe hadn't made it home after work. She got into someone's car, voluntarily or under duress. The next morning, Yasmin visited the Cutlers' house again. Percy looked even more nervous than the day before. His eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept all night. Any news? He asked, letting the detective in. Mr. Cutler, Yasmin decided to be direct. We have a witness who saw your wife get into an unfamiliar car on the day she disappeared. Do you know anything about this? Percy turned pale. No, he shook his head. I don't know who she could have gone with. What about your debts? Yasmin watched his reaction closely. Who do you owe money to, Mr. Cutler? What? He swallowed nervously. I don't have any debts. Your employer overheard you on the phone promising to pay someone back. Who do you owe? And how is this connected to your wife's disappearance? It's not connected, Percy raised his voice. Yes, I have some financial problems, but that's my business. Zoe has nothing to do with it. Are you sure? Yasmin insisted. Maybe someone decided to use her to put pressure on you? No. Percy shook his head, but fear flashed in his eyes. No, that can't be. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Percy started and went to answer it. The postman was standing on the doorstep with an envelope. Registered letter for Percy Cutler, he said. Sign here. Percy signed with a trembling hand and returned to the living room with the envelope. There was no return address, only Percy's name and address. Open it, suggested Yasmin, sensing that it might be important. Percy tore open the envelope and pulled out a photograph. His face turned white as a sheet. The photo was of their house, with a large red cross painted on the door. What does this mean? Yasmin asked, taking the photo. Who could have sent this? I don't know, Percy whispered, but his eyes told a different story. He knew, or at least guessed, who the letter was from. Mr. Cutler. Yasmin placed her hand on the man's shoulder. If you're in danger, you have to tell me. We can help. No one can help, Percy replied quietly. It's too late. Is it too late for Zoe, too? The detective asked bluntly. Do you know where she is? No, he recoiled. I don't know where Zoe is, I swear. I would never hurt her, no matter what you think. Yasmin decided to leave him alone with his thoughts, but asked for a patrol car to watch the house. She felt that the denouement was near and that Percy was in danger. The next morning, she was awakened by the phone ringing. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. Detective Prentice, the voice of the officer on duty said over the phone. You need to go to 19 Clayton Street. There's been a murder. The victim is Percy Cutler. 20 minutes later, Yasmin was at the Cutlers' house. The crime scene was swarming with police and forensic investigators. Percy's body was found in the living room, lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Time of death is approximately between midnight and 2 a.m., said the medical examiner. Judging by the nature of the wounds, the killer was very angry. This isn't just murder, it's execution. Yasmin looked around the room. There were no signs of a break-in. Either Percy let the killer in himself, or the killer had a key. On the living room wall, she noticed something written in blood, the letter E. What does it mean? Asked the young officer standing next to her. I don't know, Yasmin replied, photographing the inscription. Maybe the first letter of the killer's first or last name, or a message. Now she had not just a missing person case, but a double investigation. Zoe Hayward was missing, and her husband had been brutally murdered. Were these events connected? And if so, how? Yasmin knew she had to act fast. If Zoe was still alive, time was running out. A fog enveloped Lakeland in a gray shroud, obscuring the outlines of houses and turning streetlights into blurry yellow spots. Yasmin Prentice stood at the window of her office, watching the city gradually disappear into the milky haze. A similar fog shrouded the case of Zoe Hayward's disappearance and now the murder of her husband, Percy Cutler. On the detective's desk lay photos from the crime scene. Percy's body sprawled on the living room floor, multiple stab wounds, and a mysterious letter E written in blood on the wall. What was Percy trying to say before he died, or was it the killer leaving his mark? The office door opened and Captain Johnson entered with a folder in his hand. "The coroner's report," he said, placing the folder on the desk. "Death was caused by blood loss. We found a partial fingerprint on the door handle, but it doesn't match any of our databases." "What about the patrol officers?" Yasmin asked. "They were supposed to be watching the house." "They saw Cutler return home around 10 o'clock, alone. Then nothing suspicious until 2 in the morning when they changed shifts. The new patrol drove past the house at 3:30 and didn't notice anything. The neighbors didn't hear anything either." Yasmin shook her head. "The killer knew what he was doing. He got in unnoticed. Maybe Percy let him in himself. No signs of a struggle in the hallway." "Do you think it's connected to his wife's disappearance?" asked the captain. "It has to be." Yasmin rubbed her nose. "It's too much of a coincidence. First Zoe disappears, then Percy gets a strange letter with a photo of their house marked with a cross, and the next day he's found dead. Maybe his wife killed him?" suggested Johnson. "Staged her own disappearance, then came back to get revenge?" "Possible," Yasmin replied thoughtfully. "But then why didn't she do it right away? And why send a letter with a photo?" She shook her head. "No, there's something else going on here." Percy had debts. His boss had heard him discussing them on the phone. "Loans? Gambling?" "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." Yasmin decided to start by checking Percy's finances. She requested his bank statements for the last 6 months and was surprised to find a series of large cash withdrawals, $3,000 every month. For a mechanic with a relatively modest salary, that was a significant amount. The next step was to examine his phone records. The same number appeared several times on Percy's list of outgoing and incoming calls. The last call to that number was made the day before he received the mysterious letter. Yasmin ran the number through a database and discovered that it belonged to a man named Ezekiel Parker. The name sounded familiar, and she remembered that Parker had come to the attention of the police several times on suspicion of racketeering and drug trafficking, but each time he got off scot-free due to a lack of evidence and witnesses who suddenly recanted their testimony. "Bingo," whispered Yasmin. "That's our letter E." She decided to visit Uriah Kingsley at his bar. The Blue Jazz was a small establishment with an atmosphere reminiscent of classic jazz clubs of the 1940s, dim lighting, wood paneling on the walls, and framed photographs of famous musicians. At this early hour, the bar was almost empty, with only a couple of regulars sipping beer in the far corner. Uriah was wiping glasses behind the bar. When he saw Yasmin, he nodded as if he had been expecting her. "I heard about Percy," he said when the detective approached the bar. "That's terrible. I need your help, Mr. Kingsley," Yasmin said, sitting down on a tall bar stool. "Do you know anything about Percy's debts? Or his connection to a man named Ezekiel Parker?" Uriah froze, then slowly set the glass down on the bar. "Ezekiel Parker," he repeated quietly. "That's bad. So you know him?" "Everyone in Lakeland knows Parker," Uriah replied, looking around as if afraid someone was listening. "He controls half the illegal business in the south end of town. Drugs, loan sharking, protection. If you owe Parker money, you've got serious problems." "And Percy owed him?" Uriah sighed. "I'm not sure, but about a year ago, Percy mentioned that he borrowed money from someone, a large sum. He didn't name names, but he was very tense. He said it was for Zoe, for her operation." "Operation?" Yasmin asked. "Yes," Uriah nodded. "Zoe wanted to have gender reassignment surgery. It's expensive, and their insurance didn't cover it. Percy said he'd found a way to get the money, but didn't go into details. Yasmin thought about it. If Percy had taken money from Parker and couldn't pay it back, that could explain both Zoe's disappearance and Percy's murder. "What can you tell me about Zoe and Percy's relationship?" she asked. "Last time you mentioned that Zoe was afraid of her husband." Uriah rubbed his chin. "It's complicated," he finally said. "When they first got married, everything was fine. Percy seemed like a loving husband. But when Zoe started her transition, everything changed. Percy said he supported her, but I could see how hard it was for him. He loved Zachary, the man he had lived with for several years, and then that man told him that he had always been a woman inside. And Percy couldn't accept that? He tried." Uriah shook his head. "He really tried, but the further along Zoe's transition went, the more he pulled away. He started drinking, became aggressive. Zoe showed me her bruises. She said it was an accident, that he didn't mean it, that he apologized and cried afterward. The classic story of abuse, you know." "Why didn't she leave?" "Love," Uriah replied simply. "She still loved him and believed he would change. Besides, where would she go? She didn't have the money for a place of her own. And after the surgery." "What about after the surgery?" "She said that Percy got even worse. It was like it was the last step he couldn't take. One day, he got drunk and yelled that she had ruined his life, that she had left him in debt, that she owed him. That was a week before she disappeared." Yasmin made a note in her notebook. The picture was gradually becoming clearer, but there were still questions. "Do you know where we can find Ezekiel Parker? He has a club, the Purple King, on the outskirts of town. But I wouldn't advise you to go there alone, Detective. Parker is dangerous, and he has a lot of people." "Thanks for the advice," Yasmin nodded. "One more question. Do you know if Zoe kept a diary?" Uriah raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Yes, she did. She always wrote down her thoughts. She said it helped her figure things out." "Why?" "I just thought there might be some clues," Yasmin replied. "Do you know where she might have kept it?" "Probably at home. Zoe always carried a small notebook in her purse, but her main diary must be somewhere in the house." After leaving the bar, Yasmin decided to take another look at the Cutler house, now a crime scene. The forensic team had finished their work, and the house had been sealed off, but she had official access. Inside, everything was the same as it had been on the day of the murder, except for Percy's body, which had already been taken to the morgue. The bloodstains on the floor and the mysterious letter E on the wall were the only reminders of the tragedy that had occurred. Yasmin began a methodical search, looking through every room and every drawer. In the bedroom, in Zoe's closet, she found a box of photographs, pictures of Zoe at different stages of her life, before and after her transition. The early photos showed a young man with a gentle smile and kind eyes. The later ones showed a beautiful woman with the same smile, but with a hint of sadness in her eyes. In the bedside table drawer, Yasmin found a stack of medical bills and pharmacy receipts for hormone medications. The amounts were impressive, especially for a family with a modest income. Finally, in the small room that served as a study, Yasmin discovered a hiding place under the floorboards. There was a wad of cash, about $2,000, and a worn leather diary with the initials ZH on the cover. Sitting down at the table, Yasmin began to read. The diary covered the last 2 years of Zoe's life, starting from the moment she made the decision to transition. The first entries were full of hope and optimism. "I told Percy today. He was surprised, but he hugged me and said he loved me just the way I am. I don't know if he fully understands what it means, but his support means everything to me." However, over time, the tone of the entries changed. Percy got drunk again. He yelled that I ruined our life, that he didn't sign up for this. Then he cried and begged for forgiveness. I know it's hard for him, but it's not easy for me either. And later, "The operation is scheduled for next month. Percy somehow found the money. He won't say where, but I suspect he got into debt. He's getting more and more nervous." The last entries were disturbing. "Yesterday, Percy hit me. Really hit me, not accidentally. He said I owed him for everything he'd done for me, that I'd never be able to pay him back. I don't know what to do. Maybe Uriah is right and I should leave before things get worse." And finally, the last entry dated the day Zoe disappeared. "Today is the end. I can't live like this anymore. Percy owes P too much money and now they're threatening me. I heard them talking. If I don't disappear now, I'm afraid I'll really disappear forever. I have a plan. I hope it works." Yasmin reread the last entry several times. P. Must be Parker. And what did I have to disappear mean? Was Zoe planning to run away? If so, where did she go? The diary confirmed much of what Yasmin already knew or suspected. The tense relationship between the couple, Percy's debts, domestic violence. But most importantly, Zoe had disappeared voluntarily, fearing for her life. She knew about her husband's debts to Parker and that she was in danger. The question now was whether Zoe had managed to escape before Parker's men got to her. Or had she fallen victim before she could carry out her plan? Yasmin decided to return to the testimony of the neighbor who had seen Zoe get into an unknown car. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman with attentive eyes, met the detective at her doorstep with a cup of tea in her hands. "I always said there was something wrong with that Percy," she said, showing Yasmin into the living room, which was filled with old-fashioned furniture and framed photographs. "He was too nervous. And poor Zoe was such a sweet girl, always saying hello and asking how my blood pressure was." "Tell me again about the day you saw Zoe," Yasmin asked, sitting down on the edge of the sofa. "It was Tuesday around 6 in the evening," Mrs. Patterson began. "I was watering the flowers on the porch. I saw a black car pull up and stop outside their house. It was beautiful, shiny. Zoe got out. I recognized her right away by her red coat. She wore it a lot. She talked to the driver through the window, then got in the car and they drove away." "Did you see the driver?" "No, just a silhouette. A man, that's for sure. He was big, but I couldn't make out his face." "What about the car? You said it might have been a Chevrolet?" "Yes, it looked like one. A big black sedan. New, expensive. Jimmy Carter has one just like it, only gray." "Did you get the license plate number?" "No, dear. My eyes aren't what they used to be." Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "But there was something unusual. Oh, I remember. There was a sticker on the rear window, purple, like a crown or something." Yasmin tensed. A purple crown was the symbol of the Purple King Club, which belonged to Ezekiel Parker. "Did Zoe look scared?" she asked. "Maybe she was forced to get into the car?" No, Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "She looked determined, like someone who had made an important decision. She even waved at me when she saw me on the porch." This confirmed the theory that Zoe had left voluntarily. But why with Parker's man? Or did she not know who he was? As she left Mrs. Patterson's house, Yasmin received a message from Captain Johnson. The test confirmed that the blood used to write the letter E on the wall belonged to Percy. Most likely he had tried to point to his killer before he died. Now Yasmin had enough evidence to visit Ezekiel Parker. But first, she decided to gather more information about him. Parker was a well-known figure in the Lakeview criminal underworld, but officially he was the owner of several legitimate businesses: the Purple King nightclub, a laundromat, and a car wash. He was 45 years old, unmarried, and had been charged with assault and extortion, but the charges had been dropped due to witnesses refusing to testify. Yasmin requested a search warrant for the club and surveillance of Parker. The judge, a longtime acquaintance of Yasmin's who trusted her intuition, signed the papers that same day. Back at the station, Yasmin found new information on her desk: the results of the examination of Percy's phone. On the day of his murder, he received a call from an unknown number at 11:30 p.m. The conversation lasted less than a minute. The last call of his life. A check of the number showed that it was registered to a disposable SIM card purchased with cash at a store near the Purple King Club. The circle was narrowing. Yasmin decided it was time to act. She assembled a team of 6 officers and headed for Parker's club. The building was located in an industrial area of Lakeland, surrounded by warehouses and abandoned factories. The neon sign Purple King flickered in the evening mist, casting purple reflections on the puddles. 2 security guards stood in front of the entrance, burly men in black suits. When they saw the police cars, they tensed but made no attempt to stop the officers. "Lake County Police," Yasmin showed her badge. "We have a warrant to search the premises and question Mr. Parker." One of the guards nodded and opened the door. Inside, the club was decorated in dark colors with purple accents: velvet sofas, heavy curtains, subdued lighting. Several patrons watched the police officer's arrival with surprise. "Where is Ezekiel Parker?" Yasmin asked the bartender, a thin man with a nervous tic. "In his office," he replied, nodding toward the stairs. "Second floor, end of the hall." Yasmin climbed the stairs accompanied by 2 officers, while the others remained downstairs to search the premises. Parker's office was easy to spot, a massive oak door with a gold plaque that read, "E. Parker." Yasmin knocked, and a deep voice invited her in. Ezekiel Parker sat at a large desk, looking over some papers. He was a large man with a shaved head and a heavy gaze. Gold rings glinted on his fingers, and a massive watch hung from his wrist. "Detective Prentice, I presume?" he said with a slight smile. "I've been expecting you. Mr. Parker." Yasmin placed the warrant on the table. "We have a warrant to search your establishment and question you in connection with the murder of Percy Cutler." "Percy Cutler?" Parker shook his head with feigned sorrow. "A terrible tragedy. I heard about it on the news. Did you know him?" "We were acquainted," Parker replied evasively. "He used to come to the club sometimes." "And his wife Zoe Hayward? Did you know her too?" Parker hesitated for a moment. "I saw her a couple of times when she came to pick up her husband. A beautiful woman." "Mr. Parker, we have information that Percy Cutler owed you a large sum of money. Is that true?" "Many people have financial obligations, Detective." Parker smiled. "I'm a businessman. Sometimes I lend money to friends." "At what interest rate?" "Reasonable, I assure you. We also know that on the day she disappeared, Zoe Hayward got into a car with your club sticker on the rear window. How do you explain that?" Parker frowned. "I don't keep track of all my employees' movements, Detective. I have many cars with the club logo on them." At that moment, one of the officers conducting the search entered the office. "Detective Prentice," he said, "we found something you should see." Yasmin stepped out into the hallway. The officer handed her a plastic bag containing a red coat. "Found in a closet in one of the rooms on the first floor. From the description, it looks like the one Zoe Hayward was last seen wearing." Yasmin examined the coat carefully. There was a patch with the initials ZH on the lining. There was no doubt that this was Zoe's coat. She returned to Parker's office with the bag in her hands. "Mr. Parker, how did Zoe Hayward's coat end up at your club?" she asked, showing him her find. Parker stared at the coat for a long time, then sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Detective, I think we need to talk more openly," he finally said. "But I'd prefer to do so in the presence of my lawyer." Yasmin Prentice sat in the interrogation room at the Lakeland Police Department, watching Ezekiel Parker and his lawyer, a well-groomed man in an expensive suit with an unpleasantly sharp gaze. It had been 2 hours since Zoe's coat had been found at the Purple King Club, and Parker remained confident despite the seriousness of the situation. "My client, Miss Hayward, left this coat at my establishment voluntarily," Parker said, stroking his gold rings. "She was looking for protection, and I helped her." "Protection from whom?" Yasmin asked, crossing her arms over her chest. "From her husband, Detective." Parker leaned forward. "Percy Cutler was an unstable man. He beat his wife and threatened her. When she came to me for help, I couldn't turn a woman in trouble away." "And when did this happen?" "The same day she disappeared, according to you. She came to the club and told me about her situation. I offered her a safe place to stay until things calmed down." Parker's lawyer adjusted his tie and interjected, "My client acted out of compassion, Detective. There is no law against providing shelter to a victim of domestic violence." "And where is Zoe Hayward now?" Yasmin ignored the lawyer, keeping her eyes fixed on Parker. "I don't know," he shrugged. "She stayed in one of the rooms at the club for a few days, then said she was leaving town. She didn't say where. I gave her some money for the road and wished her luck." "How noble of you," Yasmin remarked dryly, "especially considering that Percy Cutler owed you a large sum of money." "My business relationship with her husband didn't prevent me from helping his wife," Parker retorted. "I'm not a monster, Detective." "What about Percy Cutler's murder?" "Where were you on the night he died?" "At the club with dozens of witnesses," Parker replied confidently. "You can check the surveillance cameras. I didn't leave the Purple King until 3 in the morning. Yasmin knew he was prepared for that question. Even if Parker had arranged the murder, he had made sure he had an alibi. "You know what's interesting, Mr. Parker?" Yasmin leaned back in her chair. The letter E was written in the victim's blood on the wall of the Cutler house. How do you explain that? For a moment, something like concern flashed across Parker's face, but he quickly regained his composure. I have no idea. Maybe Percy wanted to mislead the police? Or the killer was trying to frame me? The letter E was written in the victim's blood, Yasmin emphasized. It's unlikely that the killer would have forced Percy to write on the wall before he died. Then maybe it's part of a word, the lawyer interjected. Ezekiel isn't the only word that starts with E. The interrogation continued for another hour, but Parker remained confident, revealing no new information. His lawyer insisted that without direct evidence linking Parker to Percy's murder or Zoe's disappearance, they couldn't hold his client. Yasmin had to agree, but before letting Parker go, she warned him, "This is only the beginning, Mr. Parker. I will find the evidence." Parker smiled as he rose from his chair. "You're wasting your time, detective," his voice suddenly turning cold. "Some cases are better left alone, for your own good." Is that a threat? Yasmin stood up, looking him straight in the eye. "Advice from someone who values your professionalism," Parker replied. "There are enough unsolved cases in Lakeland. Why not focus on those?" Watching Parker leave the station accompanied by his lawyer, Yasmin felt her irritation growing. She was certain Parker was involved in Percy's murder and knew where Zoe was, but she didn't have enough evidence. "He's leading us on," she said to Captain Johnson when she returned to her office. "Zoe is looking for protection from her husband, and she goes to a local crime boss her husband owes money to? It doesn't make sense. Unless she was in on it," the captain said thoughtfully. "Maybe they planned to get rid of Percy together?" Yasmin shook her head. "That doesn't fit with what we know about Zoe. All the evidence suggests she was afraid of both Percy and Parker. Her diary says that they are threatening her and that she needs to disappear." "What next?" asked the captain. "We need to find the money," replied Yasmin. "Percy borrowed a large sum from Parker and by all accounts didn't pay it back. But the money has to be somewhere. We need to search the house thoroughly again." Returning to the Cutler house, Yasmin decided to proceed methodically. She started in the basement, tapping the walls for hollow spots and checking every inch of the floor. Then she moved on to the first floor, searching the living room, kitchen, and bathroom. There was no sign of a hiding place. In the bedroom, she noticed a floorboard that was slightly different from the others, a little darker, as if it had been recently replaced. Using a crowbar from her car, Yasmin pried up the board and found a small space underneath it containing a metal box. Inside the box, Yasmin found wads of cash, almost $20,000 according to a quick count, and a folder with documents. Among the papers were medical bills for Zoe's surgery, a receipt for $50,000 from Ezekiel Parker signed by Percy, and several photographs. Yasmin studied the photos carefully. They showed Percy with an unknown man passing a package between them. Judging by the date on the photos, they had been taken about a week before Zoe's disappearance. Another photograph caught Yasmin's attention. It showed a young woman who looked like Zoe, but with a different hairstyle and wearing glasses, sitting in a cafe. On the back was written, "New Life, Cedar Keys." Cedar Keys was a small town 2 hours' drive from Lakeland. This was the first real clue as to Zoe's possible whereabouts. If she had indeed run away, she could have gone there to start a new life. Yasmin decided to check out this theory, but first, she needed to figure out who the man in the photos with Percy was and what his role was in the whole story. She took the photos to the station and showed them to several officers. One of them recognized the man as Hamid Yusuf, a small-time dealer working on the outskirts of town. He usually dealt marijuana, but there were rumors that he had recently switched to harder drugs. "Looks like Percy decided to make some extra cash," Captain Johnson remarked as he looked at the photos. "He took money from Parker, supposedly for his wife's surgery, and invested it in drugs, hoping to pay back the debt with interest quickly. And when things went wrong, Parker sent his men to take care of it." Yasmin nodded. "First, they threatened Zoe. Then Percy got a warning in the form of a photo with a cross on it. And when that didn't work..." "But where is Zoe now?" asked the captain. "If she really fled to Cedar Springs, Why didn't she go to the police after her husband was killed? Maybe she's afraid, Yasmin suggested. If she knew about her husband's drug dealings, she might have feared being considered an accomplice, or she might have been afraid that Parker would find her if she showed up. Yasmin decided to go to Cedar Springs. It was a small, sleepy town with one main street, a few shops, and a cafe. After showing Zoe's photo around the local establishments, she finally got a response at a small library. "Yes, this woman comes here," said the elderly librarian, adjusting her glasses. "She calls herself Zara. Very polite, quiet. She comes almost every day, reads mostly psychology and self-help books." "Do you know where she lives?" Yasmin asked. "No, but she mentioned that she works at the Sunny Cafe across the street." At the Sunny Cafe, Yasmin showed the photo to the bartender, who nodded. "That's Zara. She works here as a waitress on the second shift. She should be here in an hour." Yasmin decided to wait. She ordered a coffee and sat down at a table by the window, from where she could see the entrance clearly. Exactly an hour later, the cafe door opened and a woman walked in whom Yasmin recognized immediately, despite her changed appearance, short hair, glasses, and a more conservative style of dress. It was Zoe Hayward. Zoe walked behind the counter, tied on an apron, and began serving customers. She didn't notice Yasmin sitting in the corner. The detective decided to wait until the cafe was less crowded so she could talk to Zoe alone. 2 hours later, the stream of customers subsided, and Yasmin motioned for Zoe to come over to her table. "Good evening," she said, showing her badge. "Detective Yasmin Prentice, Lakeview Police Department. I need to talk to you, Zoe." The woman's face paled. She glanced at the door, as if assessing her chances of escape, but then sighed and sat down across from Yasmin. "I knew this would happen sooner or later," she said quietly. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Yasmin replied. "Starting with why you faked your disappearance and ending with what you know about your husband's murder." Zoe was silent for a long time, smoothing the wrinkles in her apron. "I didn't kill Percy," she finally said. "Whatever you think, I didn't want him dead. Yes, our relationship was complicated. He sometimes hurt me, but I still loved him, in my own way." "Then why did you run away?" "Because I was afraid for my life." Zoe looked Yasmin straight in the eye. "Percy owed Parker a huge amount of money. At first he took the money for my operation, but then—" She shook her head. "Then he decided he could get rich. He got involved with some dealer and started dealing drugs. He thought he could pay Parker back quickly and we'd have enough left over for a new life." "But something went wrong," Yasmin suggested. "Yes," Zoe nodded. "Percy wasn't cut out for the criminal life. He was cheated, the goods disappeared, and the debt remained. Parker started threatening us. First Percy, then me. He said that if Percy didn't pay him back, I would have to pay. And you decided to run away." "I had no choice," Zoe said, nervously clenching her fingers. "I heard Parker's men talking about what they were going to do to me. It was scary. I had been saving money for months, little by little, so Percy wouldn't notice. I was planning my escape. I wanted to take Percy with me when I had enough money for both of us, but what? On the day I disappeared, I accidentally overheard Percy on the phone. He was making arrangements with Parker to hand me over to pay off his debt. I don't know exactly what they were planning. Sell me somewhere, use me in his club." Zoe shuddered. "I knew I had to act immediately. I had a small amount of money saved up, enough to start a new life somewhere far away from Lakeland." "How did you leave?" Yasmin asked. "After work, I called Uriah, my friend. I told him everything and asked for his help. He arranged a meeting with his cousin, who agreed to drive me to Cedar Springs. He was driving the black car your witness saw." "What about the coat? Why was it at Parker's club?" "I left it in Uriah's cousin's car." Zoe frowned. "I didn't want anyone to recognize me. He must be connected to Parker somehow and gave him the coat." That explained how Zoe's coat ended up at the Purple King, but many questions still remained unanswered. "What do you know about Percy's murder?" Yasmin asked. "Only what I read in the news." Zoe shook her head. "I was already here when it happened, but I'm not surprised. Parker wasn't the type to forgive debts." "Why didn't you go to the police? After Percy's death, you had nothing to fear from him." "But there was Parker," Zoe replied quietly. "I thought he was still looking for me. Besides, I felt guilty. If I hadn't run away, maybe Percy would still be alive. Maybe I could have helped him." "Or you'd both be dead," Yasmin pointed out. Zoe smiled bitterly. Maybe. Anyway, now you found me. What next? Are you going to arrest me? For what? Yasmin shook her head. You didn't commit a crime, Zoe. Staging your own disappearance isn't illegal unless you tried to gain financial benefit from it or defraud an insurance company. Then why are you here? To find your husband's killer, Yasmin replied. And I need your help. Yasmin explained her plan. Zoe was to contact Parker and tell him that she knew he was involved in Percy's murder and that she had proof, photographs, and documents. She would offer him a deal, her silence in exchange for money. That's dangerous, Zoe objected. Parker might just kill me. We'll be there, Yasmin assured her. The entire operation will be under police control. This is our chance to catch Parker red-handed. After much hesitation, Zoe agreed. The meeting was set for the following evening in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Lakeland. The police prepared the operation, equipping Zoe with a hidden microphone and placing snipers and officers around the warehouse. Parker arrived right on time, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. Zoe was already waiting inside, shifting nervously from foot to foot. Zoe Hayward, Parker said with a smile. Or should I call you Zara? You've caused me a lot of trouble by disappearing so suddenly. I had my reasons, Zoe replied, trying to keep her voice steady. I know what you did to Percy. Me? Parker feigned surprise. I didn't do anything to your husband. I had an alibi, remember? Not you personally, Zoe took a step forward, but you gave the order, and I have proof. What kind of proof? Parker glanced at his men, seemingly amused by the situation. Recordings of phone calls, photographs, documents about Percy's debt, and I know you threatened me, wanted to use me to pay off his debt. Parker laughed. And what do you want in exchange for your silence? Money? Yes, Zoe nodded. 50,000, the amount of Percy's debt, and a guarantee that you'll leave me alone. And if I refuse, then all the evidence will go to the police. Detective Prentice is very interested in your arrest. At the mention of Yasmin's name, Parker's face changed. His smile disappeared, his eyes narrowed. You're playing a dangerous game, Zoe, he said quietly. Do you really think you can blackmail me and stay alive? If anything happens to me, the evidence will still get to the police, Zoe retorted. I've thought of everything. Parker was silent, considering the situation. Then, he nodded to one of his men, who left and soon returned with a small suitcase. Here's 50,000, Parker said, opening the suitcase and showing the wads of banknotes. Now let's talk about the evidence. First, I have to check the money, Zoe said, walking toward the briefcase. At that moment, Parker suddenly grabbed her arm and put a gun to her head. You think I believe that pathetic blackmail attempt? He hissed. You have nothing, but now I have you, and you're going to tell me everything you know about the investigation. Police! Everyone stay where you are! Yasmin's voice rang out over the loudspeaker, and in the next moment, the warehouse was filled with officers with their weapons at the ready. Parker looked around, still holding Zoe, but realizing he was surrounded. Let her go, Parker. Yasmin stepped forward, aiming her gun at him. You have nowhere to run. You have no proof, Parker hissed. You have nothing on me. We have a recording of your confession. Yasmin nodded toward the microphone hidden on Zoe. You just confirmed your involvement in the murder of Percy Cutler. I didn't say that, Parker protested. You didn't deny it when Zoe accused you of organizing the murder. That, along with other evidence, including Zoe's testimony, will give us enough for an arrest warrant. Now let her go. Parker hesitated, feverishly assessing the situation. Then, realizing the hopelessness of his position, he slowly lowered his gun and released Zoe, who immediately ran toward the police officers. Ezekiel Parker, you're under arrest on suspicion of organizing the murder of Percy Cutler, Yasmin announced, handcuffing him while other officers detained his henchmen. You have the right to remain silent. A week later, Yasmin sat in her office finishing her report on the case. The investigation revealed that Parker had indeed organized Percy's murder, hiring one of his henchmen, a former military man with experience in hand-to-hand combat. The evidence was irrefutable. The killer's fingerprints and Percy's blood were found on a knife found in a river near the crime scene, and Parker's messages with instructions were found on the killer's phone. Further investigation also revealed that Percy had indeed tried to sell drugs to pay off his debt, but had failed. In desperation, he offered Parker his wife as compensation, unaware that Zoe had overheard their conversation and decided to run away. The office door opened and Zoe walked in. She looked different, more confident, calmer. Her short hair suited her, as did her new style of clothing. "I came to say goodbye," she said, sitting down in a chair opposite Yasmin. "I'm leaving tomorrow." "Where are you going?" the detective asked. "Seattle," Zoe smiled. "I've always wanted to live in a big city. Plus, there's a strong LGBT community there, so it'll be easier to find support." "You're a brave woman, Zoe," Yasmin said sincerely. "Not everyone could go through all that and remain so whole." "I'm not whole yet," Zoe shook her head. "But I'm working on it, every day. And I'm not afraid anymore." "What are you going to do in Seattle?" "I want to study," Zoe's eyes lit up. "Psychology or social work. I want to help people who are in a situation similar to mine, show them that there is a way out, that they can start a new life." Yasmin nodded, feeling respect for this woman who had been through so much and hadn't broken. "You know," Zoe said thoughtfully, "sometimes I think all of this was meant to happen. Not in the sense of fate or anything like that. It's just that I'm finally free. From Percy, from fear, from having to pretend to be someone I'm not. It's a terrible price to pay, but for the first time I feel like I can breathe." "Don't blame yourself for Percy's death," Yasmin said gently. "It's not your fault." "I know," Zoe smiled weakly. "Now I do. Percy made his choice and I made mine, and now I choose to live." They said goodbye, and Yasmin watched from the window as Zoe walked down the street, her back straight, her gait confident, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from her shoulders. Then she returned to her desk and pulled the unfinished report toward her.